Here's the uncomfortable truth that I don't think anybody's really talking about, but no one is forcing us to see these patients. It doesn't mean that the system isn't broken, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but no one is coercing physical therapists or other healthcare providers to see anybody's patients, United Healthcare's, a Blue Cross Blue Shield's patients, at a loss. It's just not happening. So are physical therapists and other healthcare providers really being forced into seeing patients at a loss? I see this a lot, especially recently, on social media with UHC in the news again and how they're the lowest payers, and comments are everywhere, we're being forced to see patients at a loss while UHC rakes in, record profits. Here's the uncomfortable truth that I don't think anybody's really talking about, but no one is forcing us to see these patients. It doesn't mean that the system isn't broken, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but no one is coercing physical therapists or other healthcare providers to see anybody's patients, United Healthcare's, a Blue Cross Blue Shield's patients, at a loss. It's just not happening. So let's unpack why this is happening, the declining reimbursement rates, the challenge, the financial pressures that providers are under, and things that we as providers can do that we have control over that actually make a difference for our business. So my name is Rafi Salazar. I'm from Rehab U Practice Solutions. Learn more about us at rafisalazar.com. That's the last plug. Okay. So I saw a couple posts over the last week on LinkedIn that were getting a lot of traction, and I dug into it a little bit, and I was like, well, it seems like on the surface they're eliciting this emotion, and this emotion is that providers feel hamstrung. They feel trapped, right? Especially with some of the big payers. I know we've picked on UHC a few times on this show. I've talked about it on several interviews that I've been on different podcasts, but United Healthcare as a payer, so the insurance branch of the United Healthcare Group, is probably one of the lowest payers in the market, for sure. They have probably the highest administrative burden as well, with their authorizations and the preauthorizations and the whole nine yards. And they tend to have arbitrary limits on, rate increases or the lack thereof for their providers. It's funny to see, when these things come out, whatever, the earnings report come out, people will jump to the fact that these insurance companies only have those profits or can only make those profits by, quote unquote, forcing providers to treat their patients at a loss. And the reality is, again, we need to be careful about the word forcing us and how we view the issue, because I think there's something to be said about taking ownership for what part we have to play as providers in the healthcare system when it comes to seeing patients, not seeing patients, choosing who we do and don't see, how we financially manage the business of our healthcare organization and the like. So let me start off with just a few basic premises, and we'll dive into each one. Number one, contracting is a choice, right? No one is making you sign a contract with United Healthcare Group or Blue Cross Blue Shield or Aetna or anybody. It is a choice. And that choice comes with trade-offs, right? So you need to understand the trade-offs that come with either signing a contract and going in network or being out of network with a provider. So that's points number 1 and 2. Contracting is a choice. There's reasons to be in network and there are reasons to be out of network, and we'll dive into those in a minute. Point number 2 is you need to understand the trade-off. When you contract with a payer, you're agreeing to their terms. If the terms are untenable, you can always walk away, or you probably should always walk away. It should be a business decision. Okay. And then we'll talk about the systemic problems that's causing this downward pressure. But first, let's dive into this idea of contracting and the fact that we're, handcuffed to these organizations, these payers and whatnot. It's funny. I was just reading another article or another post by somebody today on LinkedIn, and they were talking about declining reimbursements for clinicians. And basically, it's the silent crisis, how declining reimbursements threaten patient care in the healthcare system. And it talks about how for over a century, physical therapists have been important in the healthcare system. We do a lot, our physical and occupational therapists, we do a lot on the value side of things. If you look at how physical and occupational therapists help decrease hospital readmissions rates, decrease length of care, improve clinical outcomes, functional measures, all that kind of stuff, we're very important in that. We play a big role in improving the quality of life and the independence of clinicians, right? However, there's also been this downward pricing pressure that happens to ancillary healthcare providers, right? And this person's citing, I think, the 1997 Balanced Budget Act that capped therapy services at $1,500 a year, and it's around $2,800 today, cutting $20 a session, whatever. It goes on to say that practice costs are going up at around 3.5 to 4% a year, but the reimbursement rates for physical therapy and occupational therapy are going down at like 6.5 a year. So the reality is that that's totally true. Like there is downward pricing pressure and there are increasing costs of doing business. I'm a practice owner. I work with a lot of practice owners. I see how much a physical therapist requires for salary and for pay and for all of that, not to mention the administrative burden of delivering care, processing prior authorizations, doing eligibility and benefits, the RCM or the billing piece, the billing component that is a drag on the organization. So those things are totally real. I think what we need to focus on, though, is what do we have control of as clinicians or as practice owners that is much less of a victim mentality, like, oh, I've just got to go drink at the trough of UHC even though I'm going to lose money because some money is better than no money, right? So somebody commented on one of these posts and said, yes, UHC patients or PTs are forced to see UHC patients at a loss per visit, while United Health Group reports $14.4 billion in 2024 profits, including $5.5 billion for the fourth quarter. And my response was, who's forcing PTs to see these UHC patients at a loss? Like, why don't PTs just simply opt out, right? Out of network, become out of network providers, or just don't see them at all? Why don't PTs just simply not accept UHC insurance at all? And I, went on to say, like, obviously I agree that UHC is probably a predatory payer in the United States, the way they go in and contract with people at, $50 a day or whatever. But it's not like they're coercing providers to do it, right? They're not coercing any providers to see their patients at these rates. The reason they're offering those rates is because people keep signing up. They keep contracting, right? And somebody responded to my comment and said, well, no one is forced to see those patients, but it certainly is difficult to go out of network when a big portion of your current patients are UHC beneficiaries. And that is the issue we need to dig into. Not that UHC is paying us less and putting downward pricing pressure. It's that it is difficult to not be in network with UHC. So what that should mean, or what that should prompt in us, is let's look at our business and discover why is UHC such a cornerstone for the business? Should it be a cornerstone for the business? We had the same issue a while back at our clinic. And UHC was paying, I don't even remember what it was, $55 a day max, even if the patient, because we have physical and occupational therapy together, there would be times where a patient would see PT and then OT at the clinic, and we would get $55 for both of those visits, just daily max $55. Like, that's financially untenable, right? Especially when you're talking about paying, a PT or an OT, $40, $50 an hour each, like you're already losing money. So we made the decision to go out of network, and it was something that we did not take lightly. We looked at our practice demographics. We saw how many, as a percentage, how many patients that we had that were in network with United Healthcare or had United Healthcare as their payer, and then we game planned what we were going to do to mitigate the potential decrease in in those visits in the short term while we built up other parts of the business on the long term, right? So, but we did it, and honestly, we never go back at this point unless UHC decided to pay higher rates. But it was a business decision that we made based on the financials, and the reality is, I think we probably lost 5 to 10% of those patients. The rest, a lot of them stuck with us because they knew that the providers that were in network with United Healthcare in our area, anyways, in our market, were like the hospital system where there was a 3-month wait or something like that. So we had some things going for us there. Okay, so that's the reality check, is that contracting with an insurance provider is a choice, and it is a strategic business decision that you need to make as an organization as to whether or not it is worth it value-wise to sign that contract and be bound to those terms, or to not sign the contract and potentially take the risk of those patients going somewhere else. So let's break down why stay in network or why be in network. There's probably there's 3 main reasons, and I'm going to start with that first one that I said and kind of the underlying component. So the first main reason to stay in network with a big payer like UHC, even if it's financially not profitable for you or financially unsustainable for you, is that the fear of losing volume, right? Like that person said, that commenter said, it's hard, it's difficult to walk away when a lot of your patients are UHC beneficiaries. I get that. I can totally appreciate that. So that's one reason to stay in. And some people look at, some practices and healthcare organizations will look at the rate reduction that they're getting for being in network as the cost of doing business. It's basically their marketing, their patient acquisition. They don't have to have conversations with patients about the value of the services being provided. They don't need to make a sale or anything like that. It's really just, we're in network. Yes, your doctor referred you to us, etc. This is how much it costs per your provider. You're in network, so you know you're paying the least. Boom, done. It's very simple. So some providers and organizations will simply be in network because they know the patients are going to be there. Maybe they'll make up for it in volume, but they're not having to pay anybody for marketing. They're not having to go out and generate those referrals. They're not having to close the sale, all of that kind of stuff, which is, again, operations that work at scale can probably do that. A big hospital system that's seeing thousands of patients a day can probably afford to take, a 40% reduction in their fee schedule because they understand that they're going to make it up. They're going to make up for it in volume, and they've already got the infrastructure in place to deal with the administrative burden of delivering care to those beneficiaries. So number one, fear of losing volume, or the fact that it's just the cost of doing business for getting easy acquisition patients, right? So that's one reason to stay in network. Number two, which is kind of in line with that, but I think speaks to a deeper issue, is this perceived value that being in network provides. So a lot of providers will opt to be in network or only see patients for which they are in network with the payer because it prevents them from having to have difficult conversations. Like no one in healthcare wants to feel like they're being salesy, that they're selling the patient on their services. We have an aversion to that. And that aversion makes people stay in network, makes organizations stay in network, right? Because they don't want to have those conversations. It's easier if it's handled by the insurance company. This is just what your insurance company charges, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's this perceived demand or perceived value in having in-network providers. A lot of organizations, and this might be more true depending on your geographic location, right? Like if you are in an area that has a much more affluent socioeconomic demographic, people that are more willing to pay out of pocket because they see the value, this might be less of a consideration for you. I can tell you one thing. We run an organization in a part of the city that I live in that is of lower socioeconomic status as a general demographic in our location. And it is something that we understand that there are going to be patients that we call and we say, listen, we're out of network with your provider, and this is how much it's going to be. And we'll go through the value conversation with them, and they'll still say, yeah, I need to go to somebody that's in network. Totally get that. That is their right as a patient to choose where they're going to go to physical occupational therapy, right? But I think if you get to the point where your entire value proposition is built upon this fact that we're in network with all these payers, or we are in network with your insurance company, you are just more subject to downward pricing pressure or the power that those insurance companies have over you. It's just, it is a trade-off. If you're making the value proposition off we're in networks, so we're the cheapest for you, you are the Walmart of healthcare. And unless you can get to the scale of Walmart, where you are operating at economies of scale, seeing thousands and thousands of patients, and you make up for it in volume, it's not necessarily the best business decision for a small private practice. So there is understanding your organization, your economics, and then the value proposition that you're putting out there. And again, if the value proposition that you make is that you're the bargain hunt, you are the cheapest, then that means you're going to be more subject to downward pricing pressure than other organizations that are not making that value proposition. And then the other, probably the last, and probably in my mind, I've only heard it a few times as being a real issue, but it is thrown out by people when I bring up this conversation of like, no one's forcing you to be in network with a provider, is, well, there's fewer resources, or maybe it's going to be more difficult, or I don't understand the strategy for going out of network, or even cash-based altogether. Now, I've been very vocal about the fact that I do believe that going 100% cash-based does not solve the ultimate problem. And especially it doesn't solve the problem of access to affordable healthcare for the populace, right? Going out of network or going cash-based, going 100% private pay, works for a demographic that has a lot of disposable income and that can access care. It's going to be good for them, but it's not going to be good for the majority of people that really require or are dependent on the coverage of their employer's health insurance to get healthcare paid for. So I understand from a business standpoint, going out of network or going cash-based seems like the way to go. You're seeing that more and more in the physical and occupational therapy world, for sure, that there are more and more providers that are just not accepting insurance. Shoot, my dentist the other day sent out a letter of all of the insurance companies that they were dropping, that they were not going to be participating providers with anymore, and it had to do with economics, right? I think that there are still ways, and again, we operate in our clinic that we own and operate is in a geographic location where there's not a lot of disposable income. And we understand the cost that our patients bear by choosing to come to us instead of an in-network provider. And we're having those conversations. We're managing it appropriately as much as we can. But it still has been financially viable for us as an organization to go out of network, because what you'll discover, or at least what we discovered, your mileage may vary, what we've discovered is, shoot, if you're getting paid double the amount as an out-of-network provider for this one payer, you don't need to see the same number of patients to make the same amount of money, which means you're able to deliver that quality care, you're able to spend more one-on-one time, yes, and you're doing it with less patients. So there is a trade-off there as well to be said. So those are probably the main three reasons why that I've heard of people saying, well, we need to stay in network. One is like the fear of losing the volume or fear of losing the patients, this perceived value proposition of being in network, or the perceived demand for in-network providers, and then this apprehension about how do we go about billing for services as an out-of-network provider, how do we go about informing our patients, having those discussions, etc. I think the big thing to keep in mind there, at least the way I see it, is all three of those problems stem from one fundamental supposition or issue, and that is clinicians need to be comfortable communicating the value that they bring to the table, whether that be with payers, with patients, or with referring providers. So it's actually one of the chapters in my book, Better Outcomes, A Guide to Humanizing Healthcare, that in order for anybody to make an informed economic decision to purchase a good or service, you need to have information, right? Healthcare is one of those areas where the information is really one-sided. The patient generally doesn't have much information about or insight about their condition and about what the realistic time frame is for treatment and prognosis, and like, is 10 visits appropriate or is 4 visits appropriate? They don't really know that unless they're in healthcare. And then they generally don't have a full picture of how much it's going to cost, right? They understand, maybe I've got a copay, maybe I've got a coinsurance. I'm just going to go get seen and see what the bill is at the end. So one of the big value drivers for those providers that have opted to be out of network is that opening up of transparency and saying, listen, based off of your goals, based off of your diagnosis, this is what would be recommended, maybe according to the literature, maybe according to what we know, based off of your insurance and where you're at, this is how much you can expect to pay. And then we have a conversation. How does that fit into your budget, into your priorities? Do we need to drop it down to maybe once a week or once every other week? How can we accommodate your financial restrictions and lifestyle priorities or life priorities so that you can still achieve the goals that you have, still overcome whatever pain or limitation or injury that you have, without making it too financially burdensome on you as the patient, right? Having those conversations is important, and it's not happening in these in-network clinics. Why? Because their value proposition is, you're paying the least because we're in network with your insurance, and we're just going to do what we do. We're going to treat every patient the same or whatever. Not that conversation is not happening. I'm not putting words into people's mouth, but that's the way that operations are rolling. So there is some value, and you can differentiate yourself as a provider by opening up and being transparent. But that means that you're already operating at a different level than competing on price and saying that your main value proposition is that you're in network with every insurance company in your area. It's a different value proposition. It requires that you think about the services that you deliver, the value you create for patients differently. And really, what is the value? Is the value that you bring as a physical therapist the fact that you're in network and the patient only has to pay a $10 copay? Or is the value that you bring as a physical therapist that you're going to return somebody to throwing the baseball in the backyard with their grandkid without pain, or getting back to work quickly, or saving them X number of dollars in surgery? Like, those are much different value calculations and evaluations than the $10 copay, right? But by staying at or maintaining that being in network is your value proposition, you're bypassing all of that. So the patient doesn't see the value because you're never having that conversation about the value. So let's talk a little bit about why, however, is there this downward pricing pressure? I've been very open about this, and I'm not the originator of this idea. This idea has been around for a while, but the way we pay for healthcare services in the United States, by its nature, being fee-for-service, means that the only levers that payers have to manage their profitability or manage financial sustainability over the long term is there's only two, and it's either to limit the amount of services they cover or they pay for, and or pay less for those services. So in a world where the incentive structure for a physical therapist, for example, is to bill as much as I can in a 1-hour visit, as many units as possible, as ethically possible, ideally, right? Bill as many units as possible in each treatment to maximize billable revenue, and the insurance company is paying for all these units that are getting billed. The insurance company is left with, okay, we have a couple options here. Option one, we just deny the service altogether. And, UHC in particular is coming under the microscope politically these days for using like AI algorithms to to determine authorization and the like, but it's one of the main levers that they have to pull, right? If it's costing too much to deliver this kind of care, we can limit the amount of care that's being authorized, right? We can put stipulations on what the burden of proof that is required for physical therapists to get more visits from us, because they're, as far as we know, they're just drilling and billing, as my dentist friends like to say. They're just running up the bill, and we need to have some cost containment. The other way, the other lever that they have to pull in the cost containment field is we're just going to pay less for it. Sure, maybe we're not going to deny as much, but we'll pay you 50% less, 40% less, whatever the differential is. Some places UHC is paying 30% of what the standard is or something like that. It's crazy. But again, it stems from this misaligned incentive structure in a fee-for-service healthcare model, right? Providers are incentivized to bill as much as possible in the least amount of time possible. Patients just want to get better. So they're kind of incentivized to get better as quickly as possible. And then payers are incentivized to pay the least. They're trying to contain their costs, right? So systemically in the healthcare system, particularly in the US here, where we have this third-party payer system, the issue of a fee-for-service model is that the incentives are not aligned. They're going in different directions oftentimes. So it does leave clinicians with an ethical dilemma, right? Providers feel stuck between doing the right thing for their patients and staying afloat financially, right? And it is not an uncommon issue. My first job as an occupational therapist, my first job as a staff clinician, there was pressure to see people more than needed to be seen. There was pressure to sign notes off and charge bills that did not need to be charged because we, quote unquote, needed it to make the numbers work. And that's not unique to occupational therapy or physical therapy. Across the healthcare spectrum, the healthcare industry, providers are put in this dilemma of having to do what's right for the patient, but also pay their employees, pay their admin, pay their billers, pay all of that. It's a systemic issue, it's not something that's going to go away like that. It's going to require some reframing, right? So that's the main issue. There are some ways you can get around that, and there are some experiments that are happening in the healthcare insurance world, value-based payment being one of them. We had somebody on the show a while back that was talking about going direct to employer for value-based arrangements. That's great if you've got a large organization with a lot of access to a lot of data. I mentioned this on one of the episodes, is value-based care going to kill private practice? It is a challenge to really truly deliver value-based care if you don't have access to a volume of patients or a lot of data. So in that episode, I talked about some things that providers can do, maybe networks or alliances or something like that. But it is something to explore. I know we've done a couple lump sum payment arrangements with payers where it's okay, you do the eval. They say, based off of your evaluation, we're going to pay you X number of dollars for 30 days, for 60 days. You can see the patient as much or as little in that time frame, but you've already been paid. So, we go ahead and we do what we do. We document, we get the patient hopefully where they need to be before the time is up. And, those bills are going out because our billing systems are not built for that kind of thing yet. And we'll just get the denial saying, date of service, 2/17 denied because you've already received the global payment amount or something like that. And it requires us to manage those patients more differently. But we're doing innovative things, right? We're doing more remote therapeutic monitoring. We're doing telehealth. We're really trying some of this hybrid care. And it's freed us up in a little ways to explore things that work with patients that maybe we're getting the similar or equal clinical outcomes without having to do as much in-person treatment, for example. That's just one example, lump sum payments and the like. But understanding that it is a systemic issue, and one provider pulling out of a payer contract probably isn't going to fix it. This is one of those things that is going to have to come to a head. I think there's going to have to be enough political will to get something done, but then also the impetus for change is just going to have to be there. So until some of the bigger hospital systems decide to start pulling out or start pushing back or to start exploring some of these value-based rearrangement or payment arrangements, there probably won't be a whole lot that UHC, as an example, does to increase their rates over time, unless you, again, have a bunch of pull in visits or lives that you're managing, right? Okay. So the last thing I want to end on is this idea of looking at this issue of this declining reimbursement rates, the downward pricing pressure, the increased administrative costs, to look at it not from a point of victimhood, like we're being forced to take these contracts and being forced to see these patients at a loss. There are opt-out strategies, and those opt-out strategies include going out of network, transitioning to maybe hybrid or private pay business models, focus on building direct patient relationships or opting into value-based reimbursement opportunities. The key with all of that, though, is that going out of network is not the silver bullet. It's what going out of network does to you as an organization. It changes your value proposition. It makes you look at your business differently because now you're not competing on we're the Walmart of healthcare. You are really you're put in a position where you have to communicate the value that you are bringing to a payer, an organization, a patient, and having that conversation about the value you will create or you are creating for them in a way that makes them, one, recognize it, be willing to pay for it, and then engage them throughout the process. So I think that's all I've got this for now. So if you like the show, head on over to iTunes, leave us a rating and a review. If you want to pick up the book, Better Outcomes, A Guide to Humanizing Healthcare, you can find that at book.betteroutcomes.show. I have an entire chapter in there on value-based arrangements, communicating the value you bring to the table as a clinician. So until the next time, be safe, be healthy. I will talk to you then. Man, I did not notice until now, but I went to I noticed when it happened. I went to a jiu-jitsu class over the weekend or on Friday, like noon 30. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go hit an afternoon class before I, roll into the weekend, no pun intended. And round number 2, I ended up getting clocked by my forehead, my eyebrow met somebody's forehead, and this thing puffed up and swelled up. And I thought about doing this video and then realized, man, it's going to look funny. So that's what it is. It's just a black eye. That's part of what happens when you train, right? So there's that.